Welcome back to PJ Takes 5. Today is Friday, August 22nd, and college football is officially back. But we start today by looking at the resurgent Chicago Cubs. Entered the week in a big deficit for the NL Central race, and were able to chip away at that with a 3-2 series win over the Milwaukee Brewers. Starting on Monday, they got shelled 7-0. Not much to say. Was going to have the doubleheader that night, but a rainstorm forced the doubleheader to be moved to Tuesday, and that's where it really started to happen for the Cubs. Tuesday morning, Owen Casey, outfielder that they called up from the minors, was responsible for 3 runs of their 6-4 win, and then going to Tuesday night, had another RBI single to help secure a 4-1 win, where Michael Busch brought in 2 other runs, and then the big game Wednesday night. Michael Busch hits a 3-run RBI double in the third to bring everybody home. Shaw hit a single homer that ended up actually being the deciding run in the game, and then 9th inning, Daniel Palencia on the mound, bases loaded, 2 outs, and he's able to force a fly out to Nico Horner at second to secure the season series of the Milwaukee Brewers. So Cubs still several games back, but they now officially have the tiebreaker over the Brewers on the year, which could end up being a very important piece of this playoff race down the line here. A couple bad things. The lineup changes throughout time here aren't making a lot of sense, especially with the Kyle Tucker situation. It was revealed that he had a hairline fracture on his right hand between his pinky and ring finger, and they set him for 3 days. Came back Thursday and ended up going 0 for 4 in his return. They have Owen Casey, who they called up, who, like I said, had a pretty good performance throughout the series. Maybe play him instead. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to go back and forth with these guys. I know Kyle Tucker's in a slump. I know you can't just give him infinite reps. You also can't sit him infinite days in a row. But at some point, you have to be somewhat decisive if you're Craig Counsell and say, we're not playing you. We're letting you take the mental rest for a series. We'll regather you on the road trip here, but they opted to play him and ended up hurting them a lot on Thursday. So that was definitely a puzzling part. And then on the kind of other side of the puzzling decision making is the Matt Shaw situation. One of the hottest hitters on the team right now. He's buried at 9th on the batting order. Seems like it's time to move him up to get him more play appearances. They bench him on Thursday again for Willie Castro. It just overall doesn't make a lot of sense to take one of your better young players who has a lot of momentum and keep him away from the diamond. So another decision that is kind of a head scratcher. Cubs this week they start a 3-series California West Coast road trip where they take on the Angels and then the Giants and then the Rockies before they go back to Chicago. Hopefully this is a good time to kind of reset some of these lineups. If you're going to rest Tucker, rest him, play Shaw more, move him up into the batting order. It's just a little confusing that they have all the pieces to make these lineups work and make them really effective and be one of the better offensive teams in baseball. And Counsell and the Cubs seem to be against the idea of changing stuff up and putting people in more advantageous situations. So overall, a really good series win against the Brewers, obviously. Huge to have. I think there was a stat where since July 1st, Milwaukee's 27-4 against every other team and 3-4 against the Cubs. So, really reassuring sign in the midst of a struggle era for the Cubs right now, where they can elevate and play the really good teams really well and defend the home stadium. So, as we kind of heat up into playoff baseball and important late season baseball, to know they have that extra gear that they can hit is reassuring. But like I said, gotta iron out this lineup a little bit. There's still a lot of really talented players, still a lot of baseball to be played. I believe the Cubs have the easiest strength of schedule remaining at this point, and the Brewers are about the middle of the pack, 12th hardest schedule. So there's definitely opportunities for these guys to lose some games and the Cubs to make up some games against teams who are bringing out prospects and not playing full lineups and getting ready for the offseason already. So for as negative as it's been in Chicago over the past several weeks here about how they choked and it was all a rush out the gate and not a marathon, it seems like this series was a little bit of a turning point for their season. So, like I said, Angels, Giants, Rockies, 3 teams that are not playing the best baseball right now, 3 teams that they could easily win series of, if not sweep series of. So, hopefully they can keep chipping away. They're 7 games back. Just gotta go one at a time. You can't eat an elephant all in one bite, right? So, good looks from the Cubs here. Moving on down to some football talk, looking at the third and final week of NFL preseason. Last night we had Steelers-Panthers and Giants-Patriots. Not a lot to glean from either of these games just because so many stars didn't play in that Panthers-Steelers game. The one thing that did stick out from the Panther side is they've done a pretty good job of adding skill position players around Bryce Young, who didn't play, but in theory around Bryce Young. They had Royer McMillan, who didn't play. Hunter Renfrow saw some action, just a couple catches, but really a savvy run blocker and can really open up stuff downfield for people. Raheem Blackshear, they're buried on the running back depth chart, had a really strong performance, over 35 yards on the ground, and then tacked on a couple more through the air. And same thing with Trevor Etienne, another faster change of pace running back who flashed a little bit, 3 rushes for 26 yards in the first half there. So we see that they're doing a good job of surrounding Bryce Young with the receivers and the running backs to really make his job as a facilitator and a point guard easier than being somebody who has to make plays by himself. And they said it on the broadcast, but it's so true. They've done a really good job of not only adding talent, but adding a diversity of talent. So you have a receiver like Adam Thielen, who's going to win in the route running game. And then you have a receiver like McMillan, who's going to win over the top. And then you have good running backs like Chuba Hubbard, who's going to do everything from you in the backfield. They have all the pieces to make it work. It's just a situation where you have to keep moving them along, keep getting these guys to gel. It's a lot of younger players, and as they go, they should be pretty good. So I'm bullish on the Panthers right now, not just because of last night's game, but they seem to be building around a young quarterback very effectively. Looking at the other side, the Steelers, they didn't play a lot of starters either. Had a couple of defensive guys out there early. Wasn't the best look. They didn't have everybody out there. TJ Watt wasn't out there, but Jalen Ramsey was, a couple other starters. And they got gashed a little bit on that very first drive. Ended up getting the Panthers to settle for a field goal, but the way the Steelers are set up right now, they have to have a strong defense, and I just didn't quite see that Thursday night. Again, week 3 of the preseason, not everyone's playing. I'm not going to overreact to that, but the bigger area of concern, I think, for Pittsburgh right now is that running back position. They drafted Caleb Johnson in the 3rd round out of Iowa to be their real bell cow running back, and they have Jalen Warren in there, and they have Kenneth Gainwell in there, and Trey Sermon, but with Aaron Rodgers in the later stages of his career, with a lot of guys on the defensive side of the ball, all on a timeline of trying to win now, I wouldn't be surprised if they went out and tried to get a running back, especially Brian Robinson Jr. from the Commanders, another guy who can run downhill like Caleb Johnson, take steam off Rodgers and the receivers in the pass game, force defenders to respect the run. Because right now, there's nobody in that backfield that's really threatening in terms of beating you downhill over and over and over again. Obviously, we're still yet to see Caleb Johnson in a full NFL regular season situation, so he could be that player, but I think it's always good to have more than one game back like that. And for the Steelers, who, again, trying to win this year, trying to win next year, you got guys who are going to be retiring or leaving the team pretty soon here. It would make sense to give up a late-round pick and go get a running back who can help you right now. Going over to the other game from last night, Giants-Patriots. Big news with the Giants. They didn't play Russell Wilson. They played Jackson Dart throughout most of the first quarter before he came off with an injury, which I don't think is going to end up being a big deal, but he looked really good for the 3rd time. 6 for 12, 81 yards, and a touchdown, and then tacked on a 23-yard rush as well. Could have had even bigger numbers than that if it weren't for a couple of drops that he didn't really have anything to do with. But he really seems to be comfortable in that Brian Daboll scheme right now. And again, they're not full strength. They don't have Malik Neighbors out there right now. They don't have their starting running backs out there right now. But Dart seems to be just in such a comfortable place where he can maneuver in the pocket while keeping his eyes downfield, deliver accurate balls. He's got a little bit of Alex Smith, I think, when I was watching him. Just a player who maybe isn't dominant in any one part of the game, but can do every little thing pretty well. And that'll only continue to develop, especially sitting behind a veteran like Russell Wilson, who's going to teach him all these little things as he switches from the college game to the pro game. So, just another really strong showing from Dart. And it begs the question, they draft Abdul Carter at the top of the draft, who looks like a monster, and then they come back into the 1st round and get Jackson Dart. I think that class has a real potential to be a true fundamental, foundational part of their franchise moving forward, and could definitely buy Daboll a couple extra years, even if they don't win 8, 9, 10 games this year. If they finish 6-11, 5-12, but it looks like the best play is on the horizon, I think that's enough to convince Giants ownership that you really did something special and that you have special players. Dart and Carter being the leaders on either side of the ball is a really good combination. So it's not often that you see a team walk away from the 1st round with 2 players, but definitely not with 2 players who could be leaders on those respective units for the next 10, 15 years. Again, super early, but really good returns from the Giants so far. One last thing about the Giants, Dart left to get checked for a concussion, and Jameis Winston came in and first play threw a 27-yard touchdown, which is just pinnacle Jameis Winston experience. Moving on to the Patriots, Again, not a lot to glean here just because they didn't play many of their stars at all. Drake May didn't play on offense, which is really the focal point of that team this year and moving forward. We're just listening to the broadcast. I'm just a little concerned that Drake May might be a little bit overhyped at this point. He played pretty well last year. Statistically, in 13 games, a little less than 2,300 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 10 picks. Tacked on a little over 400 rushing yards and a couple touchdowns, but definitely not earth-shattering numbers. I get that he didn't have a lot to work with. They got Will Campbell at left tackle now to really help the O-line. They got a number one receiver in Stephon Diggs, who is on the back end of his career, but is albeit still a really good player. But just this idea that he is waiting to become this, generational quarterback, and it's going to be this year or next year, it might be a little bit too early to say that. I like the guy. I think he's got the right personality to be a leader on that team and to play quarterback at the NFL level, but it seems like everybody's counting him already as a player who's going to take that second-year leap, and I just look at his situation compared to other people around the NFL, and it's really not a spectacular one. The good thing for him, they drafted Travion Henderson. Didn't play last night, but he's an absolute beast, it looks like. It's good for any quarterback in general, but especially a young quarterback, to have that dependable running back that you can hand the ball off to, hit on short check down routes, and Henderson seems to be that for sure. So they keep building around him. Probably doesn't make sense to take a bunch of picks and trade them for a Trey Hendrickson or whoever's out there to try to win now. You need to draft people on that same timeline and bring them in around Drake May, and hopefully they continue to do that. And then going on to some games that are going to be on later tonight here on Friday. Not going to talk about all of these just because, like I said, many stars aren't playing, so they're not super interesting, but we got Eagles at Jets, Falcons at Cowboys, Vikings at Titans, and Bears at Chiefs. The Bears one's interesting because that's a team that might actually end up playing some of their starters just because a bunch of them sat out that first game. So if we could get another look at Caleb Williams and the offense, see if they can build from their success last week. They're not in their full regular season playbook yet, but to keep taking those steps as a unit and to see everybody get involved in the offense will be really reassuring. Heading to Saturday, we got a full slate, no game Sunday. Camps are ending up here pretty soon, so all the last games are on Saturday. We got Ravens at Bengals, Broncos at Saints, who those two teams were involved in the trade we'll get to here in a second. Rams at Browns, Colts at Bengals, and the question there is, does Anthony Richardson play after being named the backup quarterback? But we'll get to that one in a second here as well. Texans at Lions, Seahawks at Packers, Jaguars at Dolphins, Bills at Buccaneers, Chargers at Niners, and then Raiders at Cardinals to finish it off. So full weekend slate there. Again, probably not going to be the most interesting football to watch just because a bunch of the top players will be sitting out and prepping for the season here in the next couple of weeks, but we're just so close to it all being real here that it's just going to be the last little taste before some college football and then before the NFL starts in that second week of September. So enjoy it. See if you can't find a diamond in the rough for your team. But like I said, we're almost there. So moving on down to some NFL trades here. I said at the end of the last show that this is kind of the season for teams to reach out to other teams, trade for people who are going to get cut anyways or can fill a positional need or what have you. And we saw that already this week a little bit. So starting off with the most notable one, in my opinion, Jets trading for Harrison Phillips, D-tackle from the Vikings, for a late-round pick swap. Vikings are going to end up paying half of that salary, a little over $3.5 million. But this one's a little bit of a puzzler for me. He was a 2018 third-round pick by the Bills. Played really well in both Buffalo and then in Minnesota when he joined them for the past 3 years. Did not miss a single game as a Viking over 3 seasons. 314 combined tackles, 15 tackles for loss, and 8 sacks throughout his career. So definitely not the Aaron Donald, Chris Jones, super high-level production defensive tackle, but a player that plays technique really well and requires attention in the run game and pass game. And I know the Vikings have some good depth on D-line right now. Their starters, they signed Jonathan Allen, they got Jalen Redmond and Javon Hargrave, which is a solid unit, but to think that you don't need a player like Harrison Phillips might be a little bit premature. But then for the Jets side, I think this is just a total steal for them. To pair him up next to Quinnen Williams, who's another player that you really have to double team on every single play almost, it's going to create a lot of havoc to have two dudes in the middle there who can potentially be game breakers and can just mess up any offensive play from the point of attack. So I definitely see that as the Jets getting a lot better through that trade. I talked earlier about the Jets really dedicating themselves to the offensive and defensive lines, and this was just another example of that. They also ended up trading for another defensive tackle, Jawan Briggs, from the Browns. He was a late-round pick last year, played in 6 games for them last season. and it was another late round pick swap. So just another depth piece. Probably not going to see a whole lot of him this fall, but they just keep bringing people into that group to make them better and deeper and more versatile. And I think that's the way to do it. Build in the trenches, and everything else will kind of follow. And then a couple of receiver trades. So like I said, Broncos Saints are playing this weekend, and they were involved in the trade. Broncos sent Devon Vele to the Saints for a 4th round pick next year. This one's also a little bit interesting. I think a pretty good deal for the Broncos. Vele was a 7th round pick last year and had a pretty good year, 41 catches, 475 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He is an older, younger player. He's 27 and entering year 2 here. Definitely not a lot of football in front of him compared to a guy who's 22, 23 in his second season, but definitely a talented, big, tall, fast player who should be able to help out in what's a somewhat weak Saints receiving group. They have Chris Olave, but the other 2 guys in that rotation are Rashid Shaheed and Brandon Cooks. Cooks on the older side of NFL life, and Shaheed just kind of a one-dimensional, really fast go-route player, and he's really good at that, but maybe not a player that you really feel comfortable with being a diverse part of your offense outside of just throwing go routes and post routes and corner routes. So they get a guy like Vele in for whoever ends up being that starting quarterback in New Orleans for Kellen Moore is a good idea, but to give up a 4th round pick when you're not a great team, and that's probably going to be a high-end pick, potentially a top 100 pick, somebody that you could use to build around Spencer Rattler or Tyler Shuck, is a little bit of a head-scratcher. Again, Vele is a younger player in the fact that he's on a rookie-scale contract, but he's already 27, which, for some guys that's the peak, and they're out of the league by then. So a little bit of a weird, I like the move, but I don't like the price situation. But like I said, the Saints really need some more pass catchers, and I think Vele is a pretty good one. So we'll see if he suits up for the Saints this weekend against his old team, or if he just is in street clothes and is able to say hi to all the guys that he saw 2 days ago on the Broncos sideline there. And then another receiver that got traded, Sky Moore from the Chiefs, got sent to the 49ers for a late round pick swap in 2027. He was the 54th overall pick in 2022. One of those guys who was kind of supposed to help pick up the slack once they got rid of Tyreek Hill, and just was never really able to do that. As a Chief, 43 receptions, 494 yards, and a touchdown, which is basically what Vele did last year for the Broncos. But over 3 years for Sky Moore, all of those only came in his first 2 years, so he basically didn't produce anything statistically last season. Was in the conversation to be a punt returner. He had a big 88-yard touchdown last week in their preseason game as a punt returner. And you would think that maybe teams would be able to prioritize that position a little more just because of how the kickoff ruling is changing here. But ultimately, the Chiefs decided to move on for pretty low return overall. And for the Niners, it makes a little bit of sense just because that receiver room's so banged up. Brandon Ayuk is still recovering from that ACL, MCL injury from last season. They're targeting a week 6-ish return for him. Jordan Watkins, who they brought in, high ankle sprain, could be back by week 1, but potentially not. And right now, the Niners really only have Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, so definitely makes sense to add more to that room. Jennings more of a slot, 3rd down specialist, and Pearsall, a player who got drafted in the first round of 2024 draft and then was shot and had his rookie season affected there a little bit. But Sky Moore, I'm sure, will be a good site for them just to add another speed dimension and potentially a player that you can get involved in the game outside of just the traditional pass game, get him in end around screens, the return game. He's a player who can make his presence felt outside of having a 10 catch, 150-yard game. And then for the Chiefs, they got a lot of receivers still. Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Jalen Royals, who they drafted. So they're not going to miss him too bad. Going down here to our last NFL news, the big news of the week, the Colts named their starting quarterback Daniel Jones after signing him this season. He had a brief stint with the Vikings after getting cut by the Giants last year, and they brought him in to compete with Anthony Richardson, and he ended up winning the job. So this isn't a situation where Daniel Jones is going to play just to get Anthony Richardson a couple extra weeks of rest and studying the playbook. Just Shane Steichen said, quote, "He's our starting quarterback for the season. I don't want to have a quick leash on that. I feel confident in his abilities," talking about Jones. So For a 1 year, $14 million contract to end up being the starter is a pretty good deal for the Colts if it ends up working out well. And he's in a good situation where he doesn't have to be a big-time creator. He can just facilitate the ball to a stable of really good pass catchers they have. They just drafted Tyler Warren, the tight end, who seems to be very dynamic on the end line, can block a little bit. And they got 4 really good receivers: Michael Pittman Jr., Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, A.D. Mitchell. So he's able to play a little bit of that point guard position like I was talking about earlier, get the ball to people, don't have a lot of onus on the offense yourself outside of just not making mistakes, which is something that he should be able to do. We saw the one really good year under Brian Daboll where they went to the playoffs. The other years where he was with New York was a little iffy, but definitely from the Colts perspective, a safer option than going with Richardson, who's shown some really highs but some really lows. And then it's unfair to boil it all down to one play, but the sack he took in that first preseason game against the Ravens, where he unfortunately ended up getting hurt, but just did not recognize a pretty obvious blitzer on his front side. It wasn't a blindside situation to not recognize that and switch to play or protection at all. It's kind of an indictment on him, and I think a microcosm of what went wrong in Indianapolis with him. But he's still an interesting prospect in that he's very young and he's very inexperienced. 23 years old. He's only had 348 pass attempts in 2 seasons with the Colts. Last season, Gardner Minshew with the Raiders was the only other player to have more interceptions than touchdowns on 250 attempts. So the statistical side hasn't been great for Richardson, but under the right situation where maybe he doesn't have to play right away and can learn more and then eventually ease into those reps could make sense. So I know his agent was talking about a somewhat severed relationship with the franchise, which makes sense. They drafted him 4th overall, and he's the backup quarterback within 3 years. So there's going to be some talk about him getting traded potentially. That's why I'm interested to see if he plays this weekend. If he's on street clothes and backs out of it, that might tell you that's trying to get some deals trying to get done in the background there. But the teams that kind of jump out to me off the top of my head, the Rams, they have a lot of question marks around Matthew Stafford this year, but then in the future, he's not getting any younger and probably won't be with that team too much longer. So if you could bring him in, maybe be an emergency quarterback for right now, but long-term, sit with McVay and learn the offense and learn how to be a legitimate NFL quarterback could be really helpful. The Eagles are a team just because Howie Roseman has such a track record of getting talented, physically gifted players and then making them work out long term. So not that he would overtake Jalen Hurts, but being a high level backup quarterback behind him, being a quarterback that you feel more comfortable running the tush push over Tanner McKee, who maybe doesn't have that physicality behind center there. It could make some sense for the Eagles just to take a flyer and send a late round pick and try to get that done. Similar situation with the Vikings. Their QB boot camp right now had Daniel Jones last year, but Sam Darnold rejuvenated his career, sending a flyer out and bringing him in just in case something goes wrong with J.J. McCarthy, just to develop him more, to potentially be a tradable asset going down the line. Kevin O'Connell with young quarterbacks just seems to be a fit that really works. It wouldn't be that surprising to see them make that move. The Steelers are in another situation like the Rams where you have an older quarterback who's not going to be around long term. Can you bring Richardson in, have him sit behind him for a little bit, learn from one of the best 10, 15, 20 quarterbacks in NFL history, and reset his career going forward? Plus, he's a little bit of a AFC North-y quarterback playing in cold weather and downhill football. I think that makes a lot of sense. And the last one, the Raiders. They just picked up Geno, who's that veteran, but they don't really have a long-term solution necessarily. And to have him with Pete Carroll and learn from Carroll and Geno, but then you have Tom Brady in the building, could be a situation that really benefits Richardson long term. So definitely a situation that isn't super surprising, but one that is made a little bit different because Steichen basically said this is a situation where we're going with Daniel Jones for the season. So the writing might be on the wall that it's time to get out of Indianapolis for Richardson there. So we'll see if he gets moved before the season starts, and then if not, quarterbacks get hurt all the time, unfortunately. So it could be a situation where somebody goes down and you need an emergency quarterback and you're willing to get rid of a late round, mid-round pick to bring in a quarterback for right now. The upside's very high where if it goes well, you could have your starting quarterback for the future. Moving on down here, some college football topics. Like I said at the top of the show, this week is officially week 0, so we got a couple of games. Just want to do some nuggets in each one. The big and really only notable game, number 22 Iowa State facing off against 17 Kansas State in Dublin, that annual game they do in Ireland to kick off the college football season over the past few years. So I didn't know this, but normally this Big 12 matchup is called Farmageddon. So I saw it was called Farm-O-Geddon, which I thought was pretty funny, but it's the 109th consecutive year that these teams are playing each other. Just a couple of notes here. Iowa State, Rocco Becht, returning quarterback. He lost both his top receivers last year to the draft, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, who are actually both in the Texans together. They added Chase Sowell from East Carolina and Xavier Townsend from UCF. Townsend and Becht actually played together growing up in Florida, so there's a little bit of chemistry there perhaps, but a good quarterback who's going to face a different set of skill position players and potentially a group that's not quite at that same level as he had last year. So we'll see if Becht can make that next step up and try to bring Iowa State into that real Big 12 conversation and potentially a college football playoff bid. And then from the Kansas State side, Avery Johnson, another returning quarterback. He was responsible for 32 touchdowns last season, third most in the Big 12. Very similar situation. Can he take that next step up and have his team in a position to be a playoff team down the line here? So it should be a pretty good matchup to start the year off between those two teams. Again, two quarterbacks who we've seen a little bit of and are waiting to see if they have that next step in them. Then going down to some not so popular teams, we got Idaho State at UNLV. Idaho State's in the news right now. Their alum, Jared Allen, the defensive end, became the first Idaho State Bengal to be inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame this offseason. So that's a really cool moment for them. I'm sure, if not this week, throughout the year, they'll have some kind of ceremony for that and some recognition for him because he's really the number one Idaho State dude ever. And then from UNLV, led by former Mississippi State and Florida head coach Dan Mullen, who took a 3-year break from coaching in college football. So he's there, and then they brought in a couple quarterback transfers who are going to compete, starting with Michigan transfer Alex Orji and then Virginia transfer Anthony Colandre. They're going to both play this weekend, and then they're going to try to figure out who has the leg up going forward. So it would definitely be interesting to see as Dan Mullen tries to turn that program around a little bit and bring them into some notoriety, who he ends up going with more. Again, two quarterbacks that we've seen a little bit of throughout past seasons. But we'll see if he can bring them along to a step that they weren't able to reach at bigger programs. Next one, Fresno State at Kansas. Big one with Fresno State. Their quarterback, E.J. Warner, son of Kurt Warner, NFL Hall of Famer, is set to be the quarterback after 2 years at Temple and one at Rice. So he's bounced around a little bit, had to earn his shots, but it seems like he's going to be the day one full-time starter at Fresno State, which is a program that's produced a lot of decent quarterbacks, namely the Carr brothers. And then on the Kansas side of it, their quarterback, another guy who's returning, Jalen Daniels. Last season, 14.4 yards per completion, led the Big 12, which is pretty impressive, and was the fourth best in the entirety of the NCAA. He's had over 425 rushing yards 2 of the last 3 seasons. So a guy who can get it done down the field passing, and a guy who can also get it done on the ground. So, Kansas maybe is a notch below those other Big 12 teams we talked about earlier in terms of actually competing for that conference and for a playoff berth. But if Kansas is able to make some noise down the stretch here, he will be a big part of it. So it'll be interesting to see how he starts the season off. A smaller game here, Sam Houston at Western Kentucky. Sam Houston, they got a new head coach, Phil Longo, who was the OC last year at Wisconsin. Big air raid guy that usually plays pretty well at like the FCS lower level of college football. So we'll see if he can get that offense running quickly here. And then for Western Kentucky, I thought this was a cool nugget. So they're going to be inducting their 50th anniversary team from 1975, who were the runners-up in the D2 college football championship game. And it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, they lost 16-14 to Northern Michigan on they attempted a field goal that was ruled wide right, even though many players thought it went through the uprights. But this was before instant review, and there was nothing to be done about it, so they feel like they kind of got gypped out of that one, which I thought was interesting. And then during that game, Northern Michigan's quarterback was Steve Mariucci, the Niners and Lions coach and a longtime NFL Network personality. So just a little fun nugget from Western Kentucky there. And the last game of the weekend, Stanford at Hawaii. Stanford, they're entering a new era, like many of these teams. First game with Andrew Luck as their GM, which is a new position in college sports. And then Frank Reich, Luck's old coordinator, is going to be the interim head coach right now. So they fired their coach in the spring, and Wright came in. So definitely a new era for Stanford football. And for Hawaii, they've got a receiver, Jackson Harris, who actually transferred from Stanford this season. So it'll be an opportunity for him to get some revenge against his old team potentially there. And who doesn't like to see a game at Hawaii, especially early in the year, as kind of college football is all about. So hopefully we enjoy some good games there. Obviously the top 25 game, but then some of those other contests might be a little fun to get really back into meaningful football. Moving on down here to our media review, gonna talk about the movie Heat, 1995 crime epic with the two big actors, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. So this is a movie where De Niro is a professional thief and heist artist, and Pacino is an LAPD lieutenant. And they're very similar people who use their abilities and powers very differently in society. Really good movie. I watched it a little bit ago on Netflix, not too long after Val Kilmer, who's in this movie, unfortunately passed away. But he's part of a very good supporting cast with Tom Sizemore, Jon Voight, Natalie Portman, Hank Azaria, Danny Trejo. Really big cast with a lot of people who've gone to be very successful in other endeavors. And this is an interesting movie because it is really good start to finish, but there really are a couple scenes that really stick out and have lasted throughout pop culture. There's a great scene where Pacino is the cop trying to kind of track down De Niro and bust them, and he pulls him over and they meet up and grab a drink and kind of talk and pick each other's brains a little bit, and they realize that they have a lot in common, maybe more so than they have different. So that's a really good scene to see those two acting legends just kind of go at it. I think it's actually the first time that those two were in a scene together. I think they've been in a movie together before, but that was the first time they actually shared a screen together. And then there's a big shootout scene where they get busted on a bank robbery on the highway. That's another very famous scene where it's really loud, a really long sequence of shooting and moving up behind cars and posting up again. And then the ending where the two of them are mano a mano in a field with just pistols, and it's very like who's gonna mess up first, who is gonna outwit who. Those three scenes definitely shaped that movie and have influenced a lot of different things in pop culture. Part of why this movie works so well is because they do such a good job of showing the crime scene in LA as this big, overreaching, massive, not industry, but overarching systemic problem, while focusing on smaller individual storylines and personal changes and dynamics. People have since taken elements from that movie and put it into different works of fiction. So I read that for the Dark Knight movies, when Christopher Nolan was trying to focus on how to represent Gotham as this kind of overarching, systemically messed up metropolitan area, that he actually looked at this movie and figured out how Michael Mann, the director, was able to portray LA in a similar situation. And then funnily enough, GTA 3 and 4 both have mission scenes that are influenced from this movie, mostly the shootout scene on the highway, but also a bank heist scene. So it definitely left its imprint in pop culture, obviously with great cast like that, but especially a top end heavy cast with De Niro and Pacino. It makes sense that there's a lot of really good performances in this, but I really liked it. I really like these types of stories, this kind of crime and violent, but also very personal and kind of cognitive war between two people who find themselves in similar situations. I thought it was really similar to The Departed, where you have two moles who are trying to find each other. Basically, it's not quite the same situation just because one's a robber and one's a cop, but it's the same similar thing where there's a lot in common between these characters, and as they investigate one another, they can identify those similarities and they're able to outthink somebody by thinking, what would I do in this situation? And zigging while they're supposed to be zagging. And it's a really interesting movie. A little bit long, but definitely lets it all get up and breathe, and you see the daily lives of a bunch of different characters. So overall, I'm going to rate this at 9.4 out of 10. Really enjoyed it. Would definitely watch it again. Like I said, it's definitely a movie that's kind of alley. So I think it's still on Netflix. If it's not, I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but I would suggest anybody to go watch it. So that's it for our media review. That's it for the show today. Like I've said over the past couple shows, probably going to do one more week of media reviews, just because once football season really starts up, I want to be able to dedicate more time to talking about sports and watching sports. So At some point, I might go back and rank all the things that I talked about here, but I'll have to figure that out. So for now, just looking forward to the college football weekend and then the last weekend of NFL preseason. And then before you know it, we'll be at start of NFL season, finishing up MLB regular season, and we'll be in the full swing of the sports calendar here. So really looking forward to it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Bye.